Hi, welcome to Big Word Bible Studies. I'm Tanya Dennis, and this is our second video in our series on 1 Kings. If you missed the first section, which was chapters 1 through 4, you can go to tanyadennisbooks.com, look for the Big Word Bible Studies tab in the top menu, and there you can find free downloads of all of our study guides. They're in PDF format, easy to download, easy to print, and of course they're all free. And then you'll also find a link to the first video, which covered chapters 1 through 4. Again, we're studying 1 Kings in the Old Testament this season, and we are currently on chapters 5 through 8. If you didn't get the homework, please feel free to go back and check it out. It's going to give you a lot more details about what was going on in this time period, and you can dive into God's big word on your own and discover lots that's going on there. I do hope you'll use the comments section to give me your feedback. I want to hear what you're thinking, what God is teaching you, and what you're learning about his character and about yourself and our position before him as we do this study together. So let's dive right in. In 1 Kings chapters 5 through 8, we had a lot of building. We didn't spend, but King Solomon and his people and even his allies worked together to collect materials and use all of their expertise to build the temple. And not just the temple, they also built Solomon's palace, but they spent a lot of time working on all of these things. There were a lot of details, really intricate details about how wide each pillar needed to be, how thick the bronze needed to be, how many pomegranates needed to be hanging off of the lattice, and how many gallons of water, which, dude, that was huge. Did you guys get a hold of that? That giant pool that was inside the temple? It was massive, like 1,200, I think that's what I calculated at. 1,200 gallons of water just in this one pool. And there were other pools around too. But just really fascinating stuff about how detailed all of these plans were for the temple, the gold, the hundreds of thousands of people who spent time doing this. And they built this in 7 years. 7 years for the temple, and then I believe it was 11 years for Solomon's palace. But all these details. Now, a lot of times when we get to the Old Testament, we're tempted to skip over certain parts that just seem laborious. We all skip over the genealogies, we skip over these details about how big the temple was and how big the ark was and how many, trees from Lebanon they needed to chop down in order to make this. But these details are important. God is very meticulous with measurement. He spends a lot of time telling people exactly what he wants them to do in specific instances. Obviously, he hasn't told us exactly what we need to do in everyday life, but in specific instances, he is explicit with his measurements. Now, this tells us a lot about his character. In the New Testament, I believe it's Colossians. I need to look this up. I'm so sorry. I should have looked it up first. It says that God's love for us is immeasurable. And if God is so meticulous about measuring things like this, like what we read here in 1 Kings, then how much more magnificent is it that we cannot measure the love he has for us? And that's something I want to talk about today. Now, I want to let's go back to Solomon and talk about this. In 1 Kings chapter 6, I'm going to read to you verses 12 and 13. What does it say here? Solomon had started to build the temple, and right as he's getting all of his materials together and all of his people and his plan to finish all of this, God kind of interrupts him with a little reminder. He says, starting in verse 11, "Now the word of the Lord came to Solomon concerning this house that you are building. If you will walk in my statutes and obey my rules and keep all my commandments and walk in them, then I will establish my word with you, which I spoke to David your father, and I will dwell among the children of Israel and will not forsake my people Israel." Now, I want to point this out because God said that to Solomon first, kind of like a reminder. Buddy, I know what you're working on. I know what you're doing for me. I know you have great plans for me, but you need to remember that what I expect from you is what I expect from you. Now, when we go back over, I want to skip over all the details that we just talked about, and in chapters 6, 7, 8, it talks about all of the different furniture, the utensils, all the detail that went into creating all of these things so that God could be honored and he could have a home, a dwelling place within the people of Israel. Now, as we spend all of this time, all of this meticulous work and planning, reading, we're reading about all of these details and all the people who were involved in this, it's overwhelming. It's absolutely stunning. I so want to see what this looked like. Unfortunately, I can't, but I would love to because it's amazing. I mean, my imagination goes crazy. It would be fantastic. Beyond that, awesome. I can't think of any words. So as my friend Meg would say, lots of words. Anyway, let me get back. Okay, so 1 Kings in chapter 8, after all of this is done, then we get to this point where Solomon is dedicating the temple. And he prays to God, of course. He prays to God before all of the people. This is before they do this huge sacrifice of all the hundreds of animals that they're going to slaughter here for this offering to God. But in chapter 8, I want to read to you verse 23. It says, O Lord, God of Israel, there is no God like you. In heaven above or on earth beneath, keeping covenant and showing steadfast love to your servants who walk before you with all their heart. He goes on to talk about how the people want to walk with God and how they will pursue God. But then throughout the rest of the chapter, he continues to say, but when your people fail, when your people pursue other gods, when your people do this and do that and they sin against you, please have mercy on us. And he continues to say this over and over. He lists probably 8 different situations in which the people will sin. Now, God had already told him back there in chapter 6, listen, buddy, this is what I expect from you. And here Solomon is saying, okay, but this is what we're giving you and we know we're going to fail. This is where I want to point out to you the validity of grace. We cannot ever, ever, ever meet God's standards on our own. That is why we have grace. That is why he sent Jesus Christ to die on the cross to cover all of our sins, to abolish us from slavery to sin, so that we could be free and we could be with him. We can commune with him. We can have a relationship with him. This is so critical. Grace is what we need. Now, Solomon knew he couldn't meet God's standards, but he still built this great temple. God knew Solomon couldn't meet his standards, so he sent the Messiah through that line. Now, something else that I want to point out here is that, or a parallel to our lives today, we spend a lot of time making plans and we put all of this detail in what we want to do and how we want to glorify God and what we want to do. God doesn't care how ornate our plans might be. They can be covered in gold and hundreds of pomegranates and giant pools and glistening this and bronze and pillars and all of this stuff. He really doesn't care about that if our hearts are not where they need to be. We don't need to build temples for God. Now, in the homework, I talked about how Paul refers to our bodies as the temples of God. I listed several passages that I encourage you to read through and to evaluate those passages in light of Solomon's temple and kind of parallel the two. And what does that mean for us today? One of those passages was in 1 Corinthians. It's 1 Corinthians... Hold on a second, I just lost it. I believe it's 1 Corinthians 6. Yes. 1 Corinthians chapter 6. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20. It says, you are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. This is what we're called to do. We're not called to set up huge facades of Christianity that say, oh, we're better than you because we do this, and oh, we are glorifying God because we do this, and we dress this way and we act this way, and these are the things that we do to glorify God. It doesn't matter if our hearts are not fully devoted to him. We need to devote our lives, our bodies, our minds, our souls. We need to devote all of us to him. He can see through those facades. He can see through all of that. And so it is our innermost parts that bring him glory. Liz Curtis Higgs said that God is not concerned about who we were, but who we are becoming in him. This is a very true statement. God doesn't care about what we do as much as he cares about who we are. So that is my challenge for you today as you as you meditate on these chapters and on all of the things that God is so specific about. He's most specific about our hearts. We need to guard our hearts. We need to protect our hearts. We need to devote our hearts and our lives to Him and Him alone. So give it to me in the comments section. I want to hear what you have to say. I want to know what God is teaching you. And if you haven't had a chance to do the homework yet, please do. Here, I only have a few moments, and so I can only spend... I only have a few moments to talk to you about all of this, and there's so much more hidden inside these verses and these chapters. So please, if you haven't done the homework, it's not too late. You can go grab it, download your PDF study guide, and you can follow along there. The new study guide for the next few chapters will be up shortly, so be sure to check out the Big Word tab, and you can grab it there, and we'll see you in a couple weeks. Talk to you then. Bye.